Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, great. Thank you again for having me, and I'm delighted to speak for a second night. And thank you to those who came to the workshop. We have another workshop tomorrow that's about applying some of these lessons from psychological science and applying them to our own lives and the stress that we have in our own lives. So tonight I'm going to continue with a real deep dive into the science of the mind-body connection and what we know as a field around the science of stress. To remind you, what we learned last night is that the stress response is the body's response to threat. And that threat response is actually a natural and healthy response. And when your hands get sweaty and your heart rate increases and your blood pressure goes up because you perceive that there's something that is putting your survival at risk. And another way to think about the stress response or the threat response is that it's a lack of safety. And that is an important element because one of the key ways that we can begin to combat our own experiences of stress is by seeking safety, as we talked about yesterday. A really important point as we're working to understand how our own bodies respond to stress is understanding that our bodies don't know the difference between physical stress and psychological stress. Right? And so that's why in modern life, even though there's no lion about to eat us like there was evolutionarily when this system developed, we can still feel and experience the same physiological arousal states that happened back then. And yet now in modern life, we feel that arousal state when people are mean to us or we feel excluded from something, or we're under great financial strain or political stress. All of these psychological, social, and contextual stressors enact the same biological effects that our bodies are under when there actually is a physical threat in our presence. Another key point that I talked about last night is that stress is really useful. It's useful in the short term. And I really always want to make this point because it's very unlikely, first of all, that we could ever get rid of stress in our lives, right? So we're stressed about the things that we care about, like relationships and work and our livelihood. So those are the things that stress us out. We're never going to get rid of those things. It means we're meaningfully engaged in the world. And in fact, we actually wouldn't want to get rid of the stress response because stress is really useful in the short term. And it's useful even when it activates all three of these systems. These are the ones we talked about last night, the hormonal system, the autonomic nervous system, which is made up of both the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, and the immune system. And that's because in the short term, what this activation of this physiological response does is mobilize us to take action. So if you've ever felt like there's a deadline, like maybe you were back in school and you had a paper that was due, well, you feel a lot of motivation at 10:45 p.m. if it's due at 11 p.m., right? Because that's that stress response mobilizing all your energy down to your cells, and that's what I'll spend some time talking about tonight, is that actual cellular energy. But it mobilizes it in order to respond to whatever that stressor is. And then it moves it throughout your body. One of the things I didn't touch on last night is that the reason that our palms get sweaty or our mouth goes dry is because there are specific areas that blood and oxygen are getting sent to. And in fact, what we know is that when you have that stress response, most of your blood and oxygen, so your blood carries the nutrients and carries all that energy that you need, goes out into your muscles and into your arms, to your legs and to your arms, into the muscles. And that is so that you can run or fight. So when your palms are sweaty, it's because all the blood is rushing there so that you can climb or you could fight or you could flee and run away. So it's really a very useful response. It also turns off long-term processes like digestion and reproduction, like we talked about. The problem is that in modern life, we do this too much and for too long. So we're experiencing this arousal state way too much of the time. And that's a big problem if you think about our use of energy in a hierarchy of needs. So if you remember from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's certain human needs like safety and security and a shelter and food before you can worry about things like reaching your utmost potential. Similarly to Maslow's hierarchy, there's also a hierarchy of biological needs. At the very base of our bodily needs is the need to survive, right? So down at the base of this triangle, all of our energy is going to be sent to survival, to repairing and maintaining our physical integrity of our body, to responding to any acute threats in our environment, and being responsive to those threats. Once those needs are met, and only when they're met, can we go to the next rung of the hierarchy, which is preparing. In this place, what your body's doing is preparing for the next thing that's going to come. And in fact, our brains sometimes are called prediction machines, because what they're trying to do constantly is predict what's going to come next. And why they're doing that is to conserve energy. Because if we can predict with accuracy what's about to happen, then I can send my resources to prepare myself, body and mind, for that thing. So, for example, let's say you usually eat a meal like here at 10 a.m., and that's been your routine. Well, then your body will start to learn to expect a meal at 10 a.m. And at 9:30, your digestive hormones will get activated. Maybe your stomach starts to growl. And that's because your body is preparing for the food that it's about to receive. So after survival, then we go to preparing. And this is where our bodies are in this predictive regulation state, as well as a state called allostasis. And what allostasis is your body's attempt to do whatever it can to conserve the most resources and to be in the most balance. It really likes to be in balance. So it works towards that. That's why exercising can be really hard and exhausting, because it's pushing you out of allostasis and your body wants to go back into a nice neutral being state. So if your survival is met, you feel safe, there's no threats around you, your body knows what to expect, and it's in a moderate state, then things are pretty good. And what your cellular energy can then be spent on is what's at the top of this hierarchy of needs, which is optimizing. And that is where you can actually do cellular healing and repair. So let's say you have a wound, for example, or you're recovering from surgery, some actual injury on your body. Unless these two bottom rungs are met, it's very hard for your body to heal. So we know this from research studies looking at patients who have gone through surgery and how quickly they're able to recover and be released from the hospital. And we know there's really small micro things that can be done for a patient in order to help them recover faster, like having visitors. Another really interesting one is they've done studies with patients that have windows in which they can view nature and the outside. And patients who have windows and can see nature recover faster, heal faster, and are released from the hospital faster. So there's the healing can be done only when these other two things are met. And in this top rung is cellular restoration and these healing states that I mentioned yesterday, and I'll talk more about today. And what we hypothesize in our research lab is that in daily life, to help get your body into this optimization zone, we need to be spending more time in rest and deep rest states. And those are states in which you feel safe and comfortable, and your parasympathetic nervous system is activated. So I mentioned this point last night, but I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the actual cellular level functioning of energy. So on a cellular level, being in this heightened stress response for too long is cellularly exhausting. And I want to talk about what do I actually mean by that. This is a picture on the screen of a cell, and inside the cell are little organelles called mitochondria. And mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. That is where energy is actually made in the form of ATP. And it turns out that mitochondria actually play a really vital role in both our ability to respond to stress, and they're also heavily influenced by experiencing stress. There's a whole new field of study now on the functioning of mitochondria. And that's because there's a lot of evidence now that mitochondrial dysfunction is related to a lot of chronic illnesses that include the symptom of fatigue. So chronic fatigue syndrome, for example, has previously been a really mysterious illness where people just feel this deep level of fatigue to the point where they can barely get out of bed or barely function in daily life. And yet, when you look biologically at them, they seem to be fine, except until we discovered mitochondrial functioning and started to realize, oh wait, there are diseases actually of the mitochondria in which the mitochondria aren't producing or functioning at a high level. And that leads to exhaustion and fatigue. And we now know from this colleague of mine, Martin Picard, who started a field called stress energetics at Columbia University, a lot more about the interrelation between stress and mitochondria. So in one of his papers, he wrote, mitochondria fuel the stress response in two main ways. They use substrates like glucose, lipids, and amino acids, and oxygen to provide energy intracellularly via the transformation of energetic substrates and oxygen into ATP. And they also contribute to the synthesis of stress hormones, which mobilize these same energetic substrates into circulation. Very technical. What he's saying here is that they really are mitochondria, which is in every single cell in our body and animals' bodies, are really the root of how the stress response is made. It is responsible for creating the hormones that then activate and pump up the heart and pump up the blood pressure so that we can respond to any dangers. And now we also know that mitochondria are responsible for the stress response and are greatly impacted by experiences of stress. So it's a two-way relationship between experiences of stress and mitochondria. And there is significant research now showing that psychological stress actually impacts the mitochondria so they cannot function as efficiently and effectively. And I wanted to highlight just one of those studies. So one of the ways in which we study chronic stress is through a caregiver model. And I talked about this a little bit in my workshop this morning, and I don't believe I talked about it last night. Caregiving is caregiving for a family member with a disease like dementia or a disability can be an all-consuming, very stressful experience for people. And so scientists use that as a model to compare caregivers to non-caregivers, but they're matched. So we would take a group of, I'll talk about a study a little bit later, where it's a group of moms that are age 40 to 55. Some are caregivers because they're caregiving for a child with an autism diagnosis, and then the other group are age matched, so also 45 to 55, also live in the same area as the other group, and are parenting a child, but who's neurotypically developing, of the same age. So we tend to do these two group comparisons where we have a stressed group and then a matched comparison control sample. And what this group, Martin and some other colleagues of mine from UCSF, were able to do is look at a mitochondrial health index. So they were able to look at all the functioning of mitochondria, all different ways of measuring this, and create kind of an index of how healthy are your mitochondria, how good are they at responding to different stressors in the environment and producing energy in order to activate the bodily systems. In this functional index of mitochondrial health, it integrates just a variety of different indices of mitochondrial functioning. And here is one of the results that we see in comparing the chronically stressed group to the not so stressed group. And what you're looking at is a comparison of the mitochondrial health index score, where a lower score is worse and a higher score, like 170, is better. And the blue bars are the healthy, non-stressed adults. And the red bars are the chronically stressed caregivers. So what you can see here is that there are more caregivers that have lower mitochondrial health index scores compared to the control condition. So this is some of the ways in which we can start to quantify how chronic stress gets under the skin to influence us down to the level of the cells. There's a second way that we know that chronic stress gets under the skin to influence us down to the level of the cells. And that is thought to be through accelerated biological aging, by increasing the aging process. Raise your hand if you've heard of the word telomeres or telomeres. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, about half of you. Awesome. So telomeres are the caps at the end of the chromosome. And if you remember from biology class, the chromosomes are what holds our DNA in the cell. It holds the instructions for how to really kind of run our entire bodies, run our lives. And if you think of a shoelace, like there's that little plastic cap at the end of the shoelace that holds it from unraveling. That is what a telomere does at the end of a chromosome. And one of the core ways we age, just as humans age, is that the telomere shortens. And over time, that chromosome begins to unravel. And that's one of the roots of aging. And so you can imagine you want to preserve that cap at the end of the shoelace to prolong your longevity. You want to hold on to the integrity of the chromosome. In addition to the actual counting, so we can count how long someone's telomere is, and it is considered a marker of biological age. So I'm almost 40, and my telomeres might indicate that I'm 45, or hopefully like 35, because you have a different biological age than you do a chronological age, based on your genetics and life experience. In addition to this chromosome, so here in this picture, the telomere is the little red cap on the end of the chromosome. There's also an enzyme called telomerase, and that enzyme goes around and helps repair any damage that's done to the telomere. And don't fall for any advertising that you see on Facebook or Instagram that says, eat this and you'll increase your telomeres. People try to come out with all these pills and all these foods, and none of that's true, and none of that can actually work. It is just a natural process by which these enzymes circulate and rebuild any damage that's done to the telomeres. So hypothetically, and this is relevant for some of the data I'm going to show you, so hypothetically, telomerase is really potentially even more important than your telomere length, because it doesn't just slow down the aging process, it might even be able to reverse it, because telomerase fixes the damage that's done to the end of the chromosome. So you really want high and active telomerase. So if you remember from last night, the theory is that in order to help aid some of these restorative biological processes that I've talked about, healthy mitochondrial functioning and increases in telomerase and lengthening your telomeres, we need to engage this restorative biological process. And we can do this, we hypothesize, by spending more time in these states of rest and deep rest. And that's because when we're in those states, our bodies feel safe and they can spend their energy in that optimization. If we go back to the triangle, we can remain at that top of the triangle where our energy can be spent optimizing our biological functioning instead of just surviving. So the question then is, what is truly the evidence that contemplative practices or getting into states of rest and deep rest actually supports cellular level health? There is evidence that all kinds of different practices, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, prayer, forest bathing, qigong and tai chi, mantra meditation, all kinds of different contemplative practices. I know someone's going to say, well, what kind of yoga, what kind of meditation? All kinds have been studied. There's a lot of work on transcendental meditation. I would say the bulk of the research is really on MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. Scientists really like programs that are structured and can be replicated. And so MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, is a programmatic approach to teaching mindfulness. And that has received a lot of research funding from both foundations and from the government in a wide variety of populations. But there is evidence for all of these practices in improving cellular health. But it's not so simple. I wish it was so simple. I was like, so we've solved it. And now all we have to do is spend time praying and meditating, and we're going to age forever. I wish it was that simple. Unfortunately, it's not. And I thought tonight I would show you just a little bit of the complexity of the data. And what I'm going to show you is really, I would say, where we are in terms of kind of the cutting edge. And I'll showcase some of the kind of conflictual data that we're seeing. Because what it shows is how Western science is trying right now to figure out what really the truth is in terms of how rest and deep rest states through these contemplative practices are influencing us, and how can we do it in a way that's really replicable. And that is one of the really important pieces of science. Can you reproduce it? Because just one study is never enough. It could always have been a fluke or just a weird sample of people that happened to be really affected. What we need to do is be able to replicate it. And once we can replicate or duplicate the findings, that's when we can go to the next level of questioning it in the sciences. So I'm going to walk through some of this complexity now. So here is a review paper that I worked on with some colleagues from Berkeley. And this was a summary where we tried to look at, well, what is, thus far, this was in 2020, thus far, what is the state of the science on the relationship between meditation and telomeres? Can it actually help reverse or support some of this biological aging? There was 19 studies that had been conducted at that point that were looking at telomere biology and meditation in some variety of forms. And there were pretty mixed results. In 2 cross-sectional studies, so that means just if I just asked you, drew your blood right now to look at your telomere length and asked you how much you meditated, that means that's a cross-sectional study. So we found 2 studies that showed that indeed there was longer telomeres in those who were experienced meditators. So that's some positive findings for all of us in the room, right, who spent some time meditating. Now, only 2 out of the 9 studies that measured telomere length showed an increase in the length in a treatment group, and 7 studies showed no change. So what this refers to are studies in which you took meditation naive or novice meditators, people who haven't meditated before, and started them on a meditation program. And drew their blood before and drew their blood after, maybe an 8-week program, to see, can we actually replicate the same result that we found in those top 2 studies, that meditating might increase your telomeres? And it turns out that only 2 out of the 9 studies actually were able to show that. So 7 studies showed that we couldn't actually increase the length of your telomeres by having you start meditating. The 2 of the 9 studies that were effective in this were the ones that had the longest amount of time, or the most intensive ones. There was even a study in which people went on a retreat for 3 full months and were meditating for that full amount of, for all of those days. And it's that level of intensity that we saw this effect. Now, in a more positive news, 9 of the studies found an increase in telomerase activity. So remember, that's that enzyme that maybe we care about more because it helps repair any of that damage in the intervention groups. And 2 found no significant changes in telomerase. So again, not super clear, but definitely going in the right direction, that starting a meditation practice can actually enhance this enzyme that helps repair some of the biological damage done just by living life, and potentially influence your biological age. There's many, sorry, the screen is not great for this very small typed writing, but what I will highlight is that there's a lot of interest in the relationship between meditation training over here on the left. I don't know if this works. Great. Over here on the left, the acute stress response, or how the body responds to stress, and then telomere biology. So there's a lot of theoretical ideas around how allowing meditation to change and alter the different psychological processes, or strengthen our ability to have meta-awareness or insight or perspective taking, might actually enable us to respond to stress better in a way that positively influences our telomere biology. This study I was excited to show you because it really increases the scientific rigor of this field. And this was done, a collaboration. It was actually funded by the Deepak Chopra Wellbeing Center, and partnered with my mentor from UCSF, who spoke here many years ago, Alyssa Epple. And what this study did is they said, okay, we know that meditation is helpful kind of psychologically for people and potentially biologically, but is it any better than just relaxing or resting? And so what they did is they took people into this beautiful resort, and for 6 full days, and half the people got to just be on vacation in this resort. They couldn't have their phones and their work computers. They just vacationed for 6 days. And the other half of the group was in the same exact resort, was also there for 6 days with no technology, no work, but they had several meditation sessions a day. So it was a meditation retreat. Okay, so why this really ups the ante is because rest is really good. Vacationing is actually a really great psychological intervention because you're giving a lot of distance from whatever's going on that's stressful in your daily life. And there's significant amount of research on the positive benefits of just going on a vacation. So now we're saying, okay, but what if you take a vacation and then you add some meditation to it? So it's a very rigorous, highly controlled study. And it's for 6 days, which is a significant amount of time. People had blood drawn before, and then they had blood drawn after. They answered survey questions about how they felt before and after, and the 2 groups were compared to one another. And so the first finding that we have is that people felt in both groups greater vitality and a decreased amount of stress. So it was helpful psychologically for both groups. In addition, and this is really very interesting, both groups had very similar gene expression profiles related to improvements in the way that your acute stress responds, immune function, and amyloid beta metabolism, which I can talk about in a second. But when I'm talking about gene expression, we learned back when I was in biology class that genes were just set in your body. It was the letters, and your body read those letters, and that's what helped create all aspects of your body. The truth is that we now understand is that what matters more than what's written in your genetic code is how that code is expressed or read. So in fact, you can turn on and turn off different genetic codes. And that is what's heavily influenced by our environmental context. So that's the term epigenetics. Raise your hand if you've heard epigenetics before. Yeah. So that's what epigenetics is. It's this concept that the environment turns on or turns off different genes. And so what this study showed is that there were genes that were turned on from being both on vacation or in this meditation group from before to after the 60s that showed that the body was better able to do all of these things: respond to acute stressors, have healthy immune functioning, and also amyloid beta metabolism, which is, if you guys remember from last night, when I talked about the washing through the brain that was really important for dementia, where when you're sleeping and you have this fluid that goes like a wave through your brain to clean out any kind of buildup. The amyloid beta metabolism is about that healthy functioning and cleaning out of the brain's junk that's developed. So what this is showing is that both vacationing and spending a week meditating had these positive genetic expression effects. Interestingly, there was a slight difference in the intervention group for those who were beginners at meditating and those who were advanced meditators. And so what the researchers found is that for the novice meditators, they actually had a better psychological impact of the meditation intervention. They were less stressed for longer after the intervention was over compared to advanced meditators. And then regular or advanced meditators showed an increase in telomerase activity. So put another way, that meant if you were a regular meditator and then you went on a retreat, a 6-day retreat where you meditated every day, you were the ones who received the telomerase enhancement that then rebuilt that biological aging degradation of the telomeres. That's cool, right? I think that's cool. And hopefully is what is going on for many of you in the audience while you're here at the ashram, some increased telomerase activity. Okay, so what I just did there is try to showcase a bit more of what I'm talking about when I'm presenting this model that we developed, where we have contemplative practice and internal psychological safety, parasympathetic dominance, cellular optimization, and getting into states of deep rest. What I was trying to do with my last few slides is really show you what I mean when I'm talking about cellular optimization and getting your body into a place where it's not just responding to stress, but it's instead allowing its natural healing capacities to take place. And now what I want to shift to is a little bit more over here on this left side of this image and talking about the benefits of contemplative practices or meditation in particular on internal psychological safety. Now, if you remember from this model of stress that I present, we care a lot about safety. We care a lot about letting your body not be under threat. And one of the biggest threats to us is our mind. So learning ways to turn your mind into a safe place is a core goal of most psychological treatments, and something that meditation and contemplative practice can help us do as well. So one of the things that I want to highlight is just a few slides on the research that I've done on trying to really understand what does it mean for those living under chronic stress? What is going on in their mind that makes it not psychologically safe? And then how can meditation start to target some of those mental processes? So the research question that I led for this study was, can we quantify the lived experience of being under chronic stress in daily life? I went to a conference with Richie Davidson. This is a famous scientist, Richie Davidson at University of Wisconsin, and the Dalai Lama and his translator, funded by the Mind and Life Institute, which has been around for a long time, probably 50 years. And their goal has been to bring contemplative practitioners together with scientists, so Western scientists, so that we can try and learn from one another. And one of the things that I came away from that conference hearing was the Buddhist perspective that suffering is described as the non-acceptance of reality. And I really wanted to understand, well, could that be true for the people that we study in our research lab who are under a lot of chronic stress? Could it be true that it's really a non-acceptance of reality that's creating their suffering for them? And so in this study design, it's the same study that I talked about earlier, where we have two groups. We had 183 women living in the Bay Area, midlife moms. Half of them were under very significant chronic stress because they were caregiving for children with moderate to severe autism, compared to a control group of the same age matched moms who were parenting neurotypical children. In the book Telomere Effect, written by my mentor, Alyssa Epple, she talks at length about this study and how one of the big breakthrough findings from that study was that these moms were 7 years older in biological age compared to the non-stressed moms. And that was looking at their telomere length. Their telomeres had degraded to a point where they were 7 years older than the other moms. And that was a very large breakthrough finding that she wrote a book about called The Telomere Effect, which I believe is in the bookstore. Yeah, and she came a couple years ago to talk about that. In this study, what we did is they were in the study for 2 years. They had their blood drawn. They had to answer a bunch of questions. And most importantly, for these analyses, they responded every day, multiple times a day, for 21 days to how they were feeling in the moment. And these are the questions that we had. How often in the last 30 minutes have you felt that you didn't want to be where you were or doing what you were doing? And so that was our way of kind of trying to quantify what we talked about, that non-acceptance of reality. And we call this rejection of the moment, that feeling like I just don't want to be here. The second was, how often in the last 30 minutes have you felt totally focused and engaged in what you were doing? So really present, really mindful, fully here in this moment. And then how much mind wandering do you do? How much have you thought about something else that was unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral? So how much are you just not here, but you're thinking about other things? And what we found is that the chronically stressed moms were less present and more rejecting of the moment. So you can see here in the slide that the blue is the chronically stressed moms and the green is the low stressed moms. And they were less engaged in the moment, and they were more rejecting of the moment, and they did a lot more mind wandering. And so to me, what this really highlights is some initial support for that concept, that there's a rejection of the moment, there's a non-acceptance of the reality of their experience that is going on for these women that are chronically stressed. And potentially some of that feeling of not wanting to be here is leading to that psychological unsafety, right? You're not happy in your mind state, in your body, in this moment right now, potentially kicking up that threat arousal state and leading to this biological and cellular level degradation that I talked about. I'm going to skip through some of these and just really kind of try to tie this together by suggesting that the hypothesis here really is that meditation really could potentially be helping to alter these unhelpful mind states. And by altering these unhelpful mind states, we can put ourselves at more peace, at more ease, and feel like we're comfortable and at home and safe, even just in our own minds, regardless of where we are environmentally. And that is a core way that we can activate the natural, normal cellular healing processes that we innately have in all of us. So I'm going to conclude on that note, and tomorrow I'm going to pick up on a little bit of what I shared in the workshop for those of you who were there today around using sensory tools and sensory engagement to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, to get into parasympathetic nervous system dominance. And that will round out our exploration of the deep rest model. I have a few minutes to open it up to questions. Yes. He's turning it on. Thank you.
Hello, hello.
No.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Um, this is a new wave of healing happening. I did a lot of retreats in Mexico, working with a couple of these techniques. But what is your thoughts about stressing the nervous system in a way to release the stress? For example, we were doing cold plunge and sweat lodge to regulate the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, but I feel you are stressing the nervous system in a way to release the nervous system.
Yeah.
Using these ice baths and Wim Hof breathwork holotropic techniques.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going back to a slide so I can show you something, this one. So thank you for that question. That's called a positive stressor. So there are positive stressors where you're challenging your body in a healthy way. Like a HIIT workout is a great one. A cold plunge is a great one. Sweat lodges, I haven't read the research on that, but I can imagine that's similar. There is actually a significant amount of research on cold plunges. In this model, there's actually a green ball here. There's a green one up here that is positive stress. I don't tend to talk about it that much, because here's why. Those kinds of challenges are great for a healthy, not overly stressed person, where your system can handle that and learn and grow from it. What research has shown is that for those that are under chronic stress or burnt out, it's more depleting for the body. So it's a fine balance between doing that in a way that is energizing and restorative, which it can be, and if you're doing it when you're in a burned out state, it's just going to make you more burned out. And actually, interestingly, there's new research showing too that for cold plunging in particular is it's really important for women to pay attention to their hormonal cycle, because it can be more energetically depleting depending on the time in your cycle if you're choosing to cold plunge.
And also we were doing hyperbaric oxygen techniques, or PEMF. Do you know what?
Is that is it like Wim Hof breathing?
No, the pulsed electromagnetic field.
Oh.
And we were using red light, infrared red light, vibrations, and my work there was providing sound healing using the vibration of the balls on the person. But the person that was doing this retreat, she said that the vibration of the balls are moving the mitochondrial, so doing this mitochondrial release on the person, but we never had like a scientific research about it.
I mean, if you have it, send it to me and I'll look at it. I just recently was invited to do a project on sound baths, because I love sound baths. I think they're very healing. There's not good science on it yet. I think that will be forthcoming, but not quite yet for that.
Okay, that was my questions.
Great, thank you. Right next to you is one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I wanted to know, if you're not part of a study, can you just go and have your mitochondrial function measured?
Not if it's insurance. It's not going to be insurance covered unless there's evidence for some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction. So there are diseases that are mitochondrial based diseases. yeah, it'd be interesting if you're dealing with something like a chronic fatigue to see if you can find somebody that can look at that. Um,
Would it be done with a blood test?
yes, it's always a blood test. Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to remember too that for a lot of this stuff, part of the problem with Western science is we're talking on the average. Like this is for the average person, and so it's always hard to apply it, just to your individual case unless you do something like getting it tested, like you're saying. It's a big limiter in Western science. Yeah, back there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the information. It's very good to know we're on a good track. Thank you for all that data that's showing us the meditation is work. We feel already. I just have a quick question about one word that you use it at the beginning. I make a note here on my phone. You was using the word called allostasis, and I want to make sure I get it right. It's a synonym with another word called homeostasia, which is meaning basically equilibrium and balance.
It's pretty much the same. It's a synonym.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe my time is up. Is that right? 9:30? Yes, good. Oh, can I take one more? Okay, yes, one more.
So there is sleep equivalent to deep rest in terms of benefit?
Yes.
Or is
Thank you for asking that. Oh, do you have more to the question? No. Yes, sleep is the best form of deep rest. Sleep is where all our cellular healing happens. Sleep is essential. The problem is we're not getting enough, right? It's a global pandemic of sleep. People are not getting enough high quality sleep. It is foundational to all of our biological processes. So yes, I'm hearing a lot of laughing up here from the. Everyone needs more sleep. Is what I'm gathering. Thank you all so much. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow and then a talk tomorrow night. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank